that just about every Friday that we're in for a treat, but I really, really mean it this time. We've got a fantastic panel who many of you know them already, and that's why you're here. But for those of you who haven't read their works yet, I think you're going to be in for a real treat. Rick, in a moment, is going to provide intros for all of our special speakers. But I'm here just to welcome you to begin with. My name is Kenneth Townsend, and I work here at the college, and we're delighted to see all of you join us today. And I'm also going to provide a brief intro for Rick Cleveland, a man who probably needs no introduction for the vast majority of you here today. But nevertheless, I'm going to provide a short one. Rick is a veteran of more than 50 years of covering sports in Mississippi. First for his hometown newspaper, the Hattiesburg American, the Clarion-Ledger, and the Jackson Daily News, and now for Mississippi Today. Currently, besides writing several columns a week for Mississippi Today, he writes a weekly column for the Mississippi Press Association that is syndicated in newspapers around the state. In 1981, while working for the Clarion-Ledger as a sports writer, he won a National Associated Press Sports Editors Association First Place Award for investigative reporting for a series of stories about problems in the Mississippi State basketball program. Rick has won numerous state, regional, and national awards for his reporting and column writing. In 2011, he became the first sports writer ever to be honored with the prestigious Richard Wright Lifetime Achievement Award for Literary Excellence. He also received the Distinguished Mississippian Award from the Mississippi Press Association's Education Foundation in 2000, and this summer he was inducted into the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame. Rick is the author of 4 books. His 2008 biography of Boo Ferris is in its 3rd edition. His 2015 book, Mississippi's Greatest Athletes, is in its 2nd edition. Besides his sports writing, Cleveland was often called on by the Clarion-Ledger to help in coverage of hurricanes, tornadoes, elections, and even an execution. His coverage of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina won a National Feature Writing Award. Please join me in welcoming Rick Cleveland. Before I hand it over, I do want to acknowledge a couple of folks before I give it to Rick. This wouldn't have been possible without a lot of people, the work of a lot of people, including Tim and Jean Medley, who gave birth to the idea of hosting this program at Millsaps. Thanks to y'all for helping make this possible. The Mississippi Press Association, Lane and his team have been extremely helpful in making this happen, and numerous others as well. But I wanted to make sure to welcome them. Thank y'all especially. So, Rick, all yours.
Kenneth, we're getting quite a bit of feedback. I think if we could just turn the mic down a little bit.
How do we do that? For whatever it's worth, we're not going to be using this microphone much beyond the next couple minutes, but yeah. Thanks. Welcome, Rick.
How's this? Still feedback? No? Good. He said I'm a veteran of 50 years of journalism in Mississippi. I just wanted to know I started when I was 2. We'll just begin with a little editorial comment. I still hear it. See if I can do this. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. You know, Donald Trump has blasted journalists as being fundamentally dishonest, corrupt, and an enemy of the American people. I think the job of the news media, when faced with such uncertainty, is not to focus on itself, but to return to the fundamentals, ask questions, provide context, and inform the public. The story must be told. The best way to combat allegations that the media is the enemy is to simply put our heads down and do our jobs. We are facing a fundamental challenge to journalism in the 21st century. That's not necessarily a bad thing in the end. Now is the time to return to first principles, find out what happened and why, nothing more, nothing less. And that's what these people here with us today have done. Congrats to all of you for some important work. Having grown up in Mississippi, and having been in journalism all my life, I can say this for sure. If you win an award after Bill Miner in this state, you have won Mississippi's top journalism award. My dad and Bill Miner were friends until my dad died, and so I've known Bill for as long as I can remember. Lots of folks might not know that early in his career, Bill covered football games on Saturday after covering life and death stories Monday through Friday. I know this because I fetched his coffee in the press box at what was then Mississippi Southern College. He fought the good fight in Mississippi journalism for more than 70 years. When you win an award with Bill Miner's name on it, it means that you are following in his footsteps, and that's a very good thing. And now I'm going to introduce the people who are here with us, and if you'll just kind of raise your hand when I call your name. Tim Kalich. Tim is the editor and publisher of the Greenwood Commonwealth, a native of Kansas City, Kansas, and a graduate of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Kalich moved to Mississippi in 1984 to be a cub reporter at the Commonwealth, and he has never left, to the delight of some and to the chagrin of others. He has been serving as the editor and publisher since 1995. In addition to winning the Bill Miner Award for General News Reporting, he is a 5-time recipient of the J. Oliver Emmerich Award for Editorial Excellence, the top honor bestowed annually by the Mississippi Press Association to editorial writers. Jamie Patterson. Jamie is the managing editor of the Yazoo Herald in Yazoo City. A native of Natchez, she graduated among the top of her class at Natchez High School. After earning her degree in journalism from Delta State University, she worked at both weekly and daily newspapers before joining the Herald staff in 2007. She's won numerous awards for writing and photography, including the Bill Miner Award for in-depth investigative reporting in 2010. On a local level, she has been voted Yazoo's best writer for 10 straight years. That's pretty good coming from the hometown of Willie Moore. Jerry Mitchell. The stories of Clarion-Ledger investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell have helped put 4 Klansmen and a suspected serial killer behind bars. His stories have also exposed injustices and corruption, helping lead to investigations, exonerations, firings, and reforms of state agencies. A winner of the $500,000 MacArthur Genius Grant, he has more than 30 other national awards, including the Pulitzer Prize Board naming him a finalist. A recipient of an honorary doctorate from Millsaps College, he is currently working on a memoir about his pursuit of civil rights cold cases, Race Against Time, for Simon & Schuster. Jerry, I'm just glad to know a genius. Ray Mosby. And before I start this, I'm so happy the Clarion-Ledger is running your column now, Ray. It truly is one of the highlights of my week. Ray has been one thing or another at Mississippi newspapers for 40 years. He got his start at the then daily Clarksdale Press Register, eventually working his way up to managing editor and becoming the protege of the great Joe Ellis in the process. In 1993, he and his late wife Phyllis purchased the Deer Creek Pilot in Rolling Fork, where for the last 22 years, he and Natalie Perkins have made up the 2-person staff for one of the state's most awarded small weekly papers. He is a 2-time winner of the J. Oliver Emmerich Award for Editorial Excellence and serves on the Mississippi Press Association's Board of Directors. Ray Mosby. Natalie Perkins. Natalie Perkins is a native of Sharkey County and a graduate of Mississippi School for Mathematics and Science. How did you end up in journalism? She was hard. You could have made a lot more money doing something. She attended Mississippi Delta Community College, where she served as editor of the student newspaper, and the University of Southern Mississippi. After joining the staff of the Deer Creek Pilot in 1995, she won her first Better Newspaper Contest Award from the Mississippi Press Association later that year. She now serves as Associate Editor and Advertising Manager for the Rolling Fork newspaper, where she's won MPA's prestigious Advertisement of the Year Award in 2014. Natalie Perkins. Now then, I think the best way to get started on this is to have each of the award winners to give a brief synopsis of what the story was, or the series of stories was that won the award. And we'll just start at the end of the table and come this way.
Okay.
So Tim, you start.
Let me try the microphone, and if we don't need it, I'll just go with my voice. Hello?
At the bottom, just turn on the bottom.
All right. Okay. In May of last year, I received a letter from out of the blue from Edgar Ray Killen. Just to catch everybody up in case his name's not familiar to you, Edgar Ray was a long time accused of being the person who orchestrated the kidnapping and murder of 3 civil rights workers in Neshoba County, Mississippi, the infamous Mississippi burning case. And he went to trial in '67 and was ended up being a hung jury. There was one juror who held out, said that because couldn't convict a preacher. 7 others got convicted on different federal charges at that time. And then Edgar went free for a number of years, and then Jerry Mitchell, one of our panelists, was among the people who spurred on them to the state officials with cooperation with federal officials to reinvestigate the case. He was put on trial, and then he was convicted in 2005 on a manslaughter charge, but really the accusation was that he orchestrated, although he wasn't there at the time of the murder, he orchestrated the murder of those 3 gentlemen. I got a letter from Edgar Ray, as I said, in May of last year, and he asked me to send him a copy of a story, the only jailhouse interview he had given since being convicted, which he gave with Jack Elliott of Associated Press, now retired. And he said that Jack just repeated a bunch of lies about him. Would I please send him the copy of the article, that he'd been reading our newspaper and he liked our newspaper. I don't know what that sells for our newspaper, but he said he liked it. And would I send him a copy, which I did, and I floated the idea to him that, I'd be happy to come and do an interview with him if he would agree to it. And he wrote me back promptly and said, sure, come on. Well, there's a big process you go through to get to be able to visit somebody at Parchman, much less interview them. The Mississippi Department of Corrections is not real keen on having journalists hanging around. So I went through that process, and while it took, I don't know why mine was quicker, it took Jack Elliott 18 months to be able to interview Edgar Ray. It took me about 2 months, and I got on the visitation list, and I showed up at Parchman and spent 4 hours with him in the visiting room in Unit 31, which is the medical unit. Edgar Ray is in a wheelchair. He suffered he was hit by a tree 3 months before he went on trial. He's in a wheelchair, broke a bunch of his legs, suffered some back injuries and a head injury, he claims. Talked with him for 4 hours. It's a pretty rambling interview. The biggest challenge of that interview was Parchman does not let you bring anything in. So I had no recording devices, no cameras, no pens or pencils, no paper. So I just listened to Edgar Ray, talked to him, I asked a few questions, but mostly he talks a lot, and listened to him for 4 hours, and then that's where generated the story. In addition to the interview with him for 4 hours, I also interviewed relatives of the 3 men who were killed. And I think what probably, if I were to guess, the people who judged it, it was just the whole thing that Edgar Ray's pretty infamous, and then also having an interview with somebody 4 hours without any notes and trying to then put that into a compelling story.
My story in particular was we had a newly elected mayor and a couple of city council members in Yazoo City. And there were 2 residents who called our paper just frustrated, disappointed. They had purchased 2 parcels of land within the city that had been deemed a nuisance by the city, which had properties on them that had to be torn down. So in an effort to control their neighborhood with trying to revitalize it, they purchased the lots in the hopes of building a home. They went and checked all the records and whatnot, and no back taxes were owed, no unpaid fines or fees, so they thought they were free and clear. Well, come to find out, these 2 ladies come to pay their taxes, and one lady has a bill for $17,000, the other lady has a bill for $30,000. And it was from the previous owners' unpaid fees to the city for cleaning the properties. Well, the newly elected mayor, which has sold a lot of papers in Yazoo, refused to talk to them, wouldn't return their calls, and pretty much told them that it was just a glitch in their system, that they would still have to pay those taxes. So that is when our newspaper, I particularly got involved with meeting with the women and outlining their story, but more importantly, trying to get answers to why this system was out of function. What was the deal going on in the city clerk's office? And point blank, we uncovered that it was just chaos. The entire clerk's office was pretty much not even manageable. There were no records. You couldn't go in to find if you owed back taxes. If the property you wanted had taxes, you could even go in and find who owned the property sometimes. They had no sense of a filing system. But more importantly, it was the fact that these 2 citizens had begged for help from the city leaders who they elected, and they kept getting closed doors, unanswered phone calls. And what was compelling to me was that these ladies felt confident enough in our community newspaper that they felt we could get some answers. So in that, I brought their story to light, one, to warn other citizens in the city that the city clerk's office was a mess, the records were uncoordinated, and to warn them if they wanted to buy property or to conduct any other sort of business, that they needed to be called to the carpet for their dysfunction in the office. And second, I think the mayor at the time and some of the elected officials thought that if you don't talk to the press, they'll just forget about you. So what it did for this new administration is it was a shocker to our city council when they opened the front page of their hometown paper and the story was exposed, which to me, I'm humbled to be up here among many of my fellow journalists, because y'all have done some remarkable work. But my story, to me, although it was only property issues and calling elected officials out for their dysfunction, it showed to me that a community newspaper is vital to your town. Had it not been for us calling out the problem and showing elected officials that you will be shown for your era, to me that was humbling and heartfelt that these women had that much confidence in me to tell the story and had the mindset that if we can get anything done, it's the newspaper that can do it. Unfortunately, since the article is published, they are still in litigation. Details are tight since everything is lawyer talk right now. But what good thing it did was that the mayor answers my calls now. She may not give me a good quote, but she does answer them. And more importantly, it showed our elected leaders that the people do have a voice, and the Yazoo Herald is the platform for their voice. So
I'm going to let Ray talk.
She normally doesn't like me to talk. Our story started out being something really rather routine. The hospital which serves the Twin County area of Sharkey and Essequina, which combined have less people than White's paper does circulation. We'd have to get them out of the cemetery to get somewhere close to you. Our community hospital had not been renovated since really the early 1950s, and I mean, they'd been patching and a little here and there, but it really needed a facelift. Well, then we had the little issue of trying to sell it to all the people in two counties, that we're going to have a little bond issue here, and we're going to try to put that together with some loans, and we're going to try to raise enough money to where we can have a project. And all that happened, and looked like we were on our way to having a very successful thing, and then the politics started. First, there were politics between the Sharkey County Board and the Issaquena County Board, neither of which is going to be held out as a shining light of good government. Then we even had a little cabal within the hospital employees, and we decided they wanted to get rid of the hospital administrator. They all went to church together, so then now we're up in the Baptist church. It really was just mass confusion. The Sharkey County Board ended up firing the longtime chairman of the hospital's Board of Trustees, who was one of the more revered citizens in town, and for absolutely no reason. She actually came to me and said, look, if y'all don't do this, we're going to lose this hospital. And so what we basically did then, what it started out as a pretty simple, we need to fix the hospital, folks, let's rally around, turned into some actual investigative reporting. I mean, because of the rumor mill, they just made stuff up out of whole cloth and repeated it 2 or 3 times, and so it became the truth. One of them was that a boat that had been bought by the hospital during the 2011 flood was being kept by the administrator as his own personal boat, and he was taking it out to Lake Washington every weekend with his children. And he was keeping it at his house. Well, that was real hard to do. We rode by his house and wasn't his boat. The next thing is the person who allegedly reported this incident. I went and asked him, I said, did you see Jerry Peaver on Lake Washington? Oh, no, I didn't see, nothing. And it was just this thing, one after the other, until it finally, the way it was resolved is that everybody who used to be mad at everybody else ended up being mad at us. And because of that, the repairs managed to get done, and they're just being finished up this year. And I guess that's it.
I wanted to say something at least about Bill Miner to start with. This wonderful guy, wonderful journalist, and also had a wonderful family. Doug's with us today. Doug Miner's here, and so we appreciate you, Doug, and your dad. I also want to say this, since Rick kind of dealt with his introduction, is that about journalism, I think the stories you've heard here down the table is a wonderful example of what journalism is all about, what it's meant to be to communities, and how much journalism and newspapers are the lifeblood of the communities around this country. And I believe deeply in my heart that journalism remains one of the world's most noble professions. And I am so humbled and grateful to be a part of this profession with these great journalists. The story I got involved with, and some of you may have read the stories, in 2012, I started working on this story. I got a phone call, this woman named Mary Rose, and I didn't know her, and she called me. She wasn't even from Mississippi, but she said, would you be interested in writing a story about a serial killer living in Mississippi? And I'm just like, well, yeah. And so she decided to come down to Mississippi. She wanted to confront him. His name is Felix Dale. His first wife drowned. 2 other women he was sort of married to disappeared. and she believed that he had killed all 3 women. And so she wanted to come with, well, she wanted to go confront him, and of course, at least being somewhat of a journalist, I was like, I want to go with you. I want to see this. And so I went with her. We went, he lived in Montpelier, if you know where this is. It's about a half hour north of Starkville. And so we went out. It was a very remote area. She knew where he lived. We drove there. He had a trailer, but the gate was locked, and so she hopped over the gate, and being a good journalist, I followed her. And so we went down this path that just kind of weed down with the tall weeds, and then finally we got to the clearing, and there were actually 2 trailers. One was a newer trailer, and one was an older one that I could tell was damaged because it had the plywood, you know, behind the windshield. And so she goes to the newer trailer, knocks on the door, and there's no answer. And by now I'm kind of starting to try to take things in. There's like a bunch of woods behind us, and I'm like, is this guy around? Where is he? And next thing I know, she's running off to this other trailer, and she manages to crawl in the back window, which was missing, and then opens the front door. I didn't want to get in. I didn't want to be accused of, you know, trespassing or anything. So she opens the front door and she starts rummaging around, and next thing I know, she threw out a machete and clanked on the floor. And then she threw out another machete and clanked on the floor, and then another machete, and then all these swords, and I'm like, what have I got myself into? But I ended up writing about a 9,000 word story. I'm sure some of you read it. It ran 8 pages in the Clarion-Ledger. It was like a single section that we ran in November of 2012. And about, to tell the story real quick, 7 months later, Felix Dale was arrested. Actually, in the middle of my reporting, he disappeared again. And so, was found in, actually I found him in Texas, and someone called me. That's the beauty of these things. Beauty of the internet, isn't it? Anyway, but so I got a phone call and found out he was living in Canyon Lake, Texas. So, but the short of it is he got arrested, he went on trial. The trial was August of last year, and he was convicted. And the disappearances of the other women were allowed to be introduced into evidence as well. And it was the oldest conviction of a suspected serial killer in U.S. history. It was almost 54 years in between his first wife's death, which was what he was tried for, and his conviction. But it's been wild. I love being a journalist. It's interesting. You never know who's going to call. So, thanks.
Jerry, tell them what the DA said to you on the way out of the courthouse.
Oh yeah, what he said to me? Yeah, he said, if you know any other guilty sons of bitches, let me know.
You know, one thing I noticed in reading all this work, I don't believe I read a single anything from an unnamed source. I don't think I read a single unnamed source. And as you know, that's one of the main criticisms of journalists today. I think Trump himself said, unnamed sources, who are these people? I'd like to ask each one of you how you feel about unnamed sources and what your newspaper's policy is.
I guess to make it easier, we generally have a policy against unnamed sources. I mean, it's if there are some rare exceptions, I guess, but it's kind of handled on a case-by-case basis. We don't use that phrase, I can say that. I mean, we'd never just put in the paper unnamed sources, but anyway.
I don't know that we have a particular policy. In 40 years, I think I've used an unnamed source maybe 3 times. Almost all of them would have involved when it was a whistleblower situation and somebody would have lost their job. But in short, if were it to come up, it would have to be a case-by-case thing, and it would have to be a pretty compelling reason for us to do it.
We have said the Deer Creek pilot has learned.
Yeah.
Kind of get around to that.
I myself personally have only not named a source once when it was the victim of a domestic violence story that I had written. In that particular case, that'd be the only reason I never would name anyone for fear of their safety. She did give me a compelling first-hand account of an abused wife and her challenges and triumphs over that. So for her, out of respect for her, I did, because this was a lady who everyone in the community would have thought, you know, this just doesn't happen. So out of that particular case, I did leave the victim unidentified. Everything else, no, I'm going to name you. That's just, and in situations like Ray was talking about, whistleblowers, someone that can give you a tip that could perhaps lead me to someone who will talk, or to our favorite public record policies, then I will take a tip and run with it. But I will never allow someone to not be named in the paper, an anonymous source. It's not part of the Herald's vocabulary.
Just like them, we use unnamed sources almost never. We frown on it. I think it's a matter of fairness. You know, if you're usually people who want to be unnamed, they're making accusations, and I think that out of fairness, the person being accused should know who the accuser is. Now, we would make a rare exception if we felt the person was really in danger of losing their life or losing their job over it. You know, there would be exceptions. I write mostly editorials. You know, when I write news stories, it's kind of, you know, just the fun that I get to do every once in a while. But I write editorials on a regular basis, and I have editorialized frequently over the last couple of years that I think, even though I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, I think his criticism is legitimate. Washington, I think, has fallen into a trap. And the trap is the only way you get the story is by withholding people's identity. And because it's such a competitive atmosphere, they know, well, if I don't do it, then the other guy gets the story. And you've created this atmosphere in Washington that, you know, people can tell you whatever they want to, and they won't get their names out there. And I think it's bad journalism. I think sometimes it's lazy journalism. But I think Washington also operates in a different atmosphere than the rest of us.
Does any of this sound like fake news? I mean, in each one of these cases, something good came out of it that would not have come out of it had it not been for these people right here. Tim, I wanted to ask you, what did it feel like sitting across from Edgar Ray killing, knowing what you knew?
Well, going into it, I wasn't sure what to expect. In a lot of ways, Edgar Ray's kind of a pitiful character. You know, he's 92 now. He was 91 at the time I interviewed him. He's in poor health. And I think he's a pretty lonely guy. I think that's one of the reasons he gave me the interview. His wife tells me he gets very few visitors. And so he, I think, wants to talk. When he's written me very long letters. He tends to ramble. You know, I thought I might be intimidated, but I really wasn't. He was easy to talk with because, you know, he started off from the get-go. And what the biggest challenge was in a situation like that is he was saying things that I knew, boy, I got to make sure that I quote that because that's such a good quote. And just, you know, cementing that in my mind and making sure that I would not forget those quotes. That was probably the most intimidating. Talking with him, once we were in the atmosphere of it, you know, it was just like any other interview in a lot of ways. A little bit distracting because you're in a visiting room and there are all kinds of commotion, a lot of other visitors there. Parchment is somewhat of a, you know, depressing place. One of the things that was really interesting when I got to Parchment, I didn't know all the rules. You go through the security and they have you empty your pockets. And all I had with me was I had a handkerchief. I had a cold that day. And they said, you can't bring a handkerchief in here. And I said, really? They said, no. I said, what do I do when I blow my nose? She said, oh, they'll give you something.
I was also going to ask you, Tim, do you remember, I read the piece, and what was it that Edgar Ray said about Jerry Mitchell?
He said a couple things. He's not real big. Jerry, as I said, you know, did most of the reporting that led to Edgar Ray being tried and eventually convicted. and he's not a big fan of Jerry. He said that he said that Jerry was one of the most powerful people in Mississippi. So Jerry don't have a big head about that. And then he said that he was a tool of the something like the Jewish-dominated media. And I think his most sensational quote, it was something like, if Jerry had been around when they were leading Jesus to Pilate, Jerry would have been the first one to spit on him. Now, I would say this, is Jerry is not a very good interview. I tried to interview Jerry about it, and he had to think about it a long time. He ended up sending me a very short email in response. So he's not the best interviewer in the world. He's probably a much better interviewer than an interviewee.
All right. Jamie, I couldn't help when I was reading your award-winning piece, I noticed that on the front page of your newspaper, there are 4 stories, 2 of them by you, and 2 of them by your husband. You're the managing editor, he's the editor and publisher. How many other people do you have?
In the newsroom I now do have another reporter who helps me, but she's still learning the ropes. I sent her to a school board meeting, and she came back like in the fetal position, so she's not quite good yet. I'm training her, but it's, and my husband who is the editor and publisher, he is taking more roles and duties on as publisher, so essentially I am the newsroom aside from our ad department and of course bookkeeping. But you have to balance city council meetings to dog fighting rings to angry moms to shootings. It's hectic sometimes, but I like it. I never know what I'm going to do when I go to work every day. If I was in an assembly line, I would be miserable. And I can feel my paper in my hand twice a week and see and know that I've accomplished something. So, and you see my name on the front a lot more now. So. But some people bring up the topic, how do you work with your husband? You're a small staff, how do you get it done? And we do it because we love it. It's in our blood. I've been doing it for going on a decade. And I see Mr. Norman Mott, who previously owned the Herald, and I interviewed him once, and I don't know if you remember, but at the end of the interview, he said, once you get the ink on your hands, it's hard to wipe it off. So he was right.
Tell her, also, besides being a one-person newsroom, how many kids you have?
We have 3.
And the oldest is?
9, 6, and 3.
Oh, wow.
I am a chauffeur and a nurse and a cook. And in fact, my husband was going to be here, and 2 of them got sick at 9:30 this morning. So
that may be the most amazing thing of all to me.
And what's great about a community newspaper too, particularly in Yazoo City, is it's so community oriented that you're not just viewed as the newspaper, you're the newspaper lady, but you're also James's mom. And there have been numerous interviews where I've literally had a baby on a hip with a camera in this hand and a kid here, or I've been at deadline typing with the sick baby over my shoulder. That's the beauty of also working in the Emmerich News Group, and it's very community-oriented, family-minded, and I know it might cause liability issues, but I've had my kid take pictures at football games before. But it's good to have that family environment, and hopefully maybe my kids will want to walk in my footsteps. That'd be the most awesome thing, is to have them look at mom and say, hey, what she does is pretty cool. So.
Ray and Natalie, you had in this hospital story, you're in a small community, you had to know a lot of these people involved in the story that you're covering.
All of them.
All of them. Well, how does that work? I mean, how do you put...
If you want to take a shot at that. Well, before I answer you, I just want to tell you that sitting right next to Jerry Mitchell on a panel when the topic is investigative reporting makes me understand how George Gobel felt on the Johnny Carson show. Well, it even goes back to the unnamed sources. Look, in a town that's small as Rolling Fork, we cannot name a source, and just in the context of reporting, everybody's going to know who it is. I mean, you know, why'd you write that about John? Well, we didn't mention John, but it's ill, you know. There are advantages to it. It doesn't take you too long in a small town to learn who you can trust and who you can't, and who's a liar and who isn't, and who's a troublemaker and who isn't. And there was a whole lot of that going on within that story. So it would have been much more difficult, as good as it is, it'd be much more difficult for Jerry just to walk in to that community and know no one, and it would take him longer. I'm sure he would do it, but it would take him longer.
Oh, yeah.
And when you quote the hard-headed supervisor who is jumping up and down on the end of the board table, saying these off-the-wall things, as soon as you print it in the paper, everybody knows that he said exactly that because they all know him.
And he's just dumb as a sack.
Jerry, when was the first time that you were actually in the same room with Felix Bell?
After he got arrested, there was a hearing, and yeah, that was the first time I ever saw him in person, you know.
Eye contact?
Yeah, I mean, he gave me a death stare, yeah. It was one of those stares, you know, where you kind of imagine that somebody thinks if they look at you hard enough that you might fall ill or something, you know. And that's really the way it struck me. And along those lines, I have to mention this. One of the things we do as reporters, sometimes it's not nearly as glamorous as it sounds, right? I had the obligation, I guess I'll call it, of reading his journals. And he only had about 2,400 pages of journals. And it was just almost like after you read them for about an hour or two, you felt like you needed to go take a shower or something. It was just his mentality, and it's all very sexualized and everything. It just felt very sick. And of course, he was obsessed with children as well, and that's a whole nother thing. He actually apparently sexually abused this young girl, which was very sad, and she's fine now. She's married, but anyway, we confirmed that through the investigation as well, and it was just incredible. It was incredible. I mean, all the things that kind of bizarre things that happened, like get a phone call from Mary Rose, this couple in Tulsa that bought Felix's house had found something in the attic. And so it was Mary Rose and me and the private detective who worked on this. Y'all saw the 2020 episode, and we did a story on it too, called Batgirl, that's her nickname. And so we all go to Tulsa, and so it was literally a suitcase that Felix had left behind. That was Annette's suitcase, the woman that disappeared, his wife, and had her birth control and clothes and everything else in there. And he claimed that she was leaving to go to Mexico to be with men, so, you know, left her birth control behind. So very fascinating, but they used all that at the trial.
Was that the biggest break while you were working on the story, the biggest thing that happened?
There were just a ton of stuff. I mean, the private detective going in and interviewing Felix that was probably one of the more valuable things to me as a journalist. Not necessarily had anything to do with his conviction, you know, with his being arrested. It didn't have anything to do with that, but the fact that she went in and got him to tell his entire life story. So I got his entire life story plus his journals. And so just from a writing perspective, reporting perspective, it was incredibly valuable. And then also on top of that, just to let you know, I don't want to take up too much time, but I ended up getting this phone call. This is after he's arrested. He's supposed to have already been tried. I get this phone call from this hysterical woman, and I was just just getting ready to hang up. And then because I'm thinking this is somebody who obviously has a problem. And all of a sudden she said, I used to be married to Felix Vale. So I'm like, okay, let's talk. And so that ended up that conversation ended up leading to two other people as well, who basically Felix had told, not her as much as the other two, that he had killed his first wife. And they ended up being witnesses at trial. So there's just a lot of things that happened. And Dr. Bodden looked at, that was probably the biggest early break. Dr. Bodden looked at the autopsy and said, this is a homicide. And that was probably the big early break for it.
At this point, if anybody has, we got a small enough group, if anybody has a question they'd like to ask to anybody, that's fine, just raise your hand. There you go.
I used to work for the Leland Progress under Jim Lacey, and when I was there, I was doing some advertising plus being the assistant editor, and I found that a lot of people who were the merchants did not like the editor. I mean, they had a beef with the editor because of what he was writing, and they would withhold advertising. So, and that's your livelihood. So you've got on both sides. So I just wondered, is it still the case today?
I guess that's going to depend on who the business person is. Yes, it happens. Particularly, I think everything is magnified when you're putting out a paper in a small town. It becomes more of a lightning rod, even than it would be in a larger place. And I think that, yes, it's happened to us. You've got the issue where the guy that owns the hardware store that is a regular advertiser, well, yeah, his kid gets a DUI. His kid breaks into the liquor store, whatever it is. Well, I guess I can answer it like this. When my daughter was in high school, I told her that if one of your friends gets in trouble, depending on what it is, he or she, her name may be in the newspaper. But if you get in trouble, your name is going to be in the newspaper. And so that's just what you have. Yes, you worry about it. Yes, sometimes you actually suffer from it, but usually not for too long. I don't remember if it came down for a choice between something revenue-oriented and the editorial. I don't think I've ever landed anywhere except you do the editorial.
I'd like to, I'm going to give a couple answers to that. First is Wyatt Emmerich over there. Wyatt, raise your hand. Wyatt's my boss. He's the president of Emmerich Newspapers, which the Commonwealth is part of. His dad hired me and was my mentor. And he also, coincidentally, was a good friend of Bill Miner's. And one thing he said to me, he said, usually editors move around about every 10 years because you piss off everybody in town within 10 years, it's time to bring in another guy. But I think that has changed. What I have found in my experience, because I've been down in Greenwood 35 years and I was a Yankee who moved to Mississippi, is that the longer you're there, the more that people tend to tolerate you. And even though sometimes I write things that a significant portion of our community might not always agree with, they know me from church, they know me from coaching, they know my wife, they like my wife, that helps. And they tend to accept you more because you put in roots. I can tell you the first couple of years in Greenwood, I did not try to express my opinions very vocally because, Mississippi, we tend to be a little defensive. And you're thinking the people from the outside are coming in to criticize us. And it works a lot better if they feel like you're part of the community. They tend to take your criticism a little bit better. The third thing, and this is why it's not on the panel, but I'm going to pat him on the back. Those of you who have followed his coverage on Mississippi Power Company and the Kemper County, what I call boondoggle, that probably cost our newspapers quite a bit of money in advertising from Mississippi Power Company. But we felt very strongly about it. Wyatt felt very strongly about it and wrote about it extensively in ways that some of our other larger organizations did not write about. And he was willing to suffer the consequences, which meant, didn't get as much advertising from the utility company. But, probably saved the ratepayers of the state, saved them $6 billion. And he was willing to make that sacrifice. And I think if you do that often enough, people respect you, and in the long haul, it does you a great amount of good.
You can send your checks to...
No, I just want to emphasize one thing that Tim said. When you're a newspaper editor, whether it's in Greenwood or whether it's in Rolling Fork, or I think whether it's in New York, it's nice if you're liked, but it's essential that you be respected.
Jamie, how were y'all handling it? How would you?
I was going to say, with Yazoo being the size that it is, we of course value our merchants and business people, of course, tremendously. But in any situation where the editorial far outweighs the money, we always go editorial. We've covered private school academy scandals, which were big advertisers in our nonprofit area, and we've also, one of our biggest advertisers had a kind of a backdoor pill pushing operation one time. But the good thing about Yazoo, I think, and touching on what everyone has said up here too, is that yes, if you are loved and accepted, that is great, but being respected too is just as important, because in every situation where it's been a big spender or a prominent family or a prestigious business, when I've went toward them with the interview, I've point blank always laid out that I'm going to run this. This is going to be printed. Out of respect and courtesy, I think you should comment on these matters. And I'm giving you the opportunity and the ink to have your say at this point. And those, for the most part, they might be mad at me for a little while, but then after it kind of wears off, they thank me for actually even approaching them in the first place and allowing them to have their say. So I think that if you establish roots in your community, and more importantly, they know they can trust you, that is the big thing. They know that I'm not trying to come in and get that money-making quote. They do know that I want to get the story right. Now that doesn't mean they all like me, but they at least know that I will do right by them.
Yeah, I think one thing we always need to remember is that there's a reason they're advertising in the first place. Man, it's to help them, it's not to help you. Mm-hmm. So it works both ways. Did I see another hand? Anybody? Yes, sir.
I'm a student here at Millsaps and I came here to hear each of these stories to see what it's like doing journalism. From what I can tell, it's pretty crazy.
You're absolutely right.
Outside of the stories each of you gave, what would you say is the craziest story you've ever had?
I'll have to go on this. This is the greatest thing ever. It really is. It's kind of, I shouldn't have such joy in telling it, but it was my first, I was a total rookie reporter at the time. I had very little experience. I was fresh out of college at the Bolivar Commercial in Cleveland. And I was assigned different rural beats of the community. Nobody wanted Shelby, but me being the rookie got stuck with the town of Shelby, which is, if anyone knows Shelby in the Delta, it's an extremely small, very tight-knit.
Most interesting place.
Most interesting place. Run-of-the-mill call. I called the city hall and says, hi, this is, I was unmarried at the time. This was Jamie Kemp from the Bolivar Commercial, just calling and checking in to see what y'all got going on in Shelby and just touching base with you. The city clerk said, well, we have a snake. And I said, okay, you have a snake? But she said, yeah, but it's dead and they're serving it. And I said, I'm on my way, because I was like, there's something going on. So I grab a photographer and we're hauling to Shelby, and I go into the city hall. The street department worker who found this humongous rattlesnake dead on the side of the road, first of all, was drunk at 9 a.m. on the clock. And apparently a local merchant or eating establishment there saw the street worker attempting to clean up the snake from the road and paid him $1 for the snake. And to which he then took the snake into his restaurant. And to that point, people came in and began asking. It's a small town, they want to know what's going on, and they've discovered that he's already got it prepared, and it never made it to any plate or deli window. But that was the craziest story by far. The drunk city street worker sells a dead snake that almost got served to residents of Shelby. So that part was I'll never forget that one. The Yazoo has plenty, but I see I might be recorded. I don't
There you go.
We have plenty.
Oh, we have plenty, yeah. I guess ours would be a toss-up between the Baptist preacher in Anguilla who shot his wife in the head twice in the same place and got out of town to meet his internet lover in Pennsylvania, but because we nearly, oh hell, I think it was libel, but the fact that he didn't sue me was proof more. We took up the entire front page of the paper, writing out every reason why this guy had to have killed his wife before he left town. And a highway department investigator, highway patrol investigator, saw the piece, it interested him, and 2 years later he arrested the guy was tried, he's down in Parchment. That and it would be a type. Well, yeah, we had a judge that was selected as one of the worst judges in America by Reader's Digest. That lasted about 3 years. He threw his clerk in jail in the middle of the night, and me and the town lawyer had to go down and get his clerk out of the jail. He would send word about once every 2 weeks by one of his grease-covered employees. He owned a tire shop outside of town.
But he also ran a illegal gun shop out of too.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he finally got disbarred. He got taken off the bench, and then about a year later, he got arrested by the ATF for selling an Egyptian-made machine gun to an undercover officer. So I guess that would do it.
Jerry or Tim, you got one?
I'll make them real quick. Several. I love weird stories. So this story about the guy who killed another guy because he insulted his dog. It involved dog fighting. So I did a one about about a guy that robbed a bank in Holly Springs and wrote the stick-up note on the back of his mom's check.
We don't catch them because they're smart.
Exactly. I did a story, this is awful, but it's still, I think, funny. So a couple is sitting at the drive-in up in New Albany, Mississippi, and or near there, and so they got in a quarrel and he emptied his gun into her head. But it was a Saturday night special, and a very poorly made Saturday night special. And so the bullets did not actually penetrate her skull. So she got out of the hospital some weeks later, and they were married. So anyway, Anyway, I could tell lots of stories. I could tell stories all day about this kind of stuff.
Drive-ins led to a lot.
The drive-ins are a good one. Oh, no, speaking of drive-ins, there's another quick one. So there's a guy that was showing X-rated movies or close to X-rated movies at a drive-in theater in New Albany, Mississippi. I covered this. Oh gosh, this is so great. So he gets arrested for showing these movies under Mississippi's law, and essentially his argument is this law is unconstitutional. It's overly broad, it's unconstitutional. And so he fully, like me, expects to be convicted. It is, by the way, an all-Baptist jury. I thought that was, being able to write that as an all-Baptist jury, because I watched Fort Dyer, I knew I could say that. It was an all-Baptist jury. They go out for an hour, and the guy, like I said, admitted it. Oh, and these preachers were the ones that brought the complaint. They went out and saw this and filed a complaint and testified and all that stuff about how horrified they were. And so anyway, trial jury goes out for an hour, comes back, acquits the guy. And of course, I'm stunned. I'm like, what? The guy admitted it? I'm just from a legal standpoint, I'm trying to figure this out. And so I finally got a hold of one of the jurors, and it just said, what made you guys decide to quit? I said, well, we just felt like them preachers didn't have any business being out that late.
Unless somebody has another question, that might be a good one to go to.